What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Good show in store today. Going to kind of recap the biggest news of the past 72 or so hours. A couple major things have happened, so I want to cover all of that. First, though, I want to take some time and kind of wrap up and give some final thoughts on the World Cup that obviously came to a conclusion Sunday morning Eastern Time with Spain beating England to win their first Women's World Cup. Plenty has happened with the Spanish Federation in the hours and days since, and I was so focused on immediately getting a recap video out there talking about the game in particular that I didn't get to talk about some of the bigger picture stuff that goes along with Spain's victory. So that is what I'm going to do today, and then touch on some of the other kind of big takeaways from the tournament. Only one place to begin, though, and that is, of course, with the World Cup champions, Spain. Going to get to all of the things that have happened. But I want to start with this. If that group of players, without a healthy Alexia Putellas, who was clearly not herself, without all of the Barcelona players who were excluded from the squad, can put in a performance like that against the reigning European champions, who many people, including me, believe are the best team in the world, at least when fully healthy, what does that say about what this Spain team could be and what this Spain team could have been over the past, 2, 3, 4 years, if all of the other stuff had gotten taken care of, if a manager was in place that the players had confidence in, if Spain had their entire squad at this tournament. That's one of the big things I came away thinking about. Is obviously the talent has been there. Putellas, Tania Bonmati, Jennifer Hermoso. But even though Barcelona have a couple of Champions League titles, my big thing has been they haven't actually taken down Lyon. They haven't cemented themselves as the team to beat in Europe. They've cemented themselves as one of the top teams, as one of the favorites every season in the Champions League. But they got their chance against Lyon, and Lyon handled them pretty easily. You combine that with Spain's struggles relative to what they just did at the last couple major tournaments. And yeah, they played the US tough in 2019. Still, though, they haven't been a factor at the business end of these major tournaments, despite all of the progress you've seen in those 4 years. And so I'm just sitting here wondering if the players were not sending letters in protest of the Federation and what they believe is just inadequate training and coaching they're receiving, and if, we'll just say, Serena Wiegman was in charge of this team over the past 4 years, past 6 years, where could this team and this program be? If that group of players dealing with all of that stuff were able to convincingly, I would say, win the World Cup. Now, it wasn't perfect from start to finish. You can still make an argument that Japan or Sweden were the best team in the tournament. But there was no disputing who the best team in that final was. And to me, there's really no disputing Spain were deserving champions, even if they weren't the best team in the tournament. And the other part of this is that the margin of error that is getting smaller and smaller applies to Spain too. We talk about it in the context of the US all the time. But you're just making life more difficult on yourself. And it happened to work out this time. And maybe this was this combination of the tension, the frustration, kind of this unifying cause it just all came together in a way that this was the best version of Spain you were going to get, even with the players missing, even with Putellas at less than 100%. Maybe that's the case. But what if it wasn't? And what if there was a real missed opportunity here? And that this could have been a continuation rather than the start of what it seems like is going to be an incredibly promising time for the Spanish women's national team. And that is why I want to get to the next part of this, which is that this trophy and this success and what these players did is not vindication for this federation behaving the way they have behaved and backing Jorge Vilda the way they have. And one of my big takeaways from the game was Spain won the tactical battle. And Jorge Vilda was technically the one who put Salma Paralluelo out on that field. And Serena Wigman was the one who decided to try and press this team. And now a lot of that had to just do with Spain's technical ability. But the coach that everybody's in love with put a plan together that got ripped to shreds by a team managed by Jorge Vilda. Now, obviously there's a conversation about how much credit does Jorge Vilda actually get for that. Obviously, the players deserve an enormous amount of the credit. We're not going to know exactly what that balance, what that dynamic was. Clearly, the players don't think highly of him. There's a reason we are at this point and that players don't want to play for him. But I do want to recognize that Spain won the tactical battle, and I think Vilda got the lineup right. But going back to the point I made at the beginning, that doesn't mean that these were the right decisions. To me, what it says is, how many opportunities did you miss? And how much farther along could this team be if you had actually listened to your players and if you had trusted your players and given them an opportunity to do this sooner and not made their lives so difficult and not made them have to focus about fighting the federation, but rather focused on, the opponent. Because more than anything else, this is a story about these players. And so I don't see this as proof. And of course, the federation and, there were the Vilda in tweets and all that stuff. To me, that's not only is that not what this is about, but I don't even think you get that vindication to say that you were right. Because if you were right, then what has been happening the past 4 years where this team hasn't been a factor in the last couple major tournaments? It's not like this is a new group. Now, some of these players were obviously brought in because of the players who weren't there, and, the squad changes over a 4-year period. But it's not like all these key players just popped up. Alexia Putellas has been there, Bonmati, Paredes, Hermoso. These aren't a bunch of 22-year-olds. So I want to get out of the way first. To me, if you want to make this a bigger conversation just outside of the players and talk about the federation aspect, it's not about, is this vindication? They're going to say it is. But I want to flip that around and say, if the players were able to overcome all of these obstacles you put in their way, how much have you held them back from? Now, maybe it was the perfect storm and that tension needed to be there for this team to perform the way it did. It's possible Jose Mourinho will tell you there's a lot of validity to that. It's kind of his managerial philosophy. Got to have some chaos and some turmoil in there. But there's a difference between the kind of tension that Jose Mourinho causes and create intentionally and what this team is dealing with. Then the next part of that is Luis Rubiales. And now apparently there's going to be I believe the term is General Assembly, special meeting that appears to be discussing his future after, of course, he kissed Jennifer Hermoso on the lips, then didn't really apologize for it, then apologized for it after I kind of feel like he had no choice. Is there, and this is really the question I come back to on this, is there anything Rubiales has done that makes it worth keeping him around? With not only this stuff, but some of the other things that have happened in his tenure. Do you feel like he is actually making a difference where he is worth the headache, the PR, the frustration with the players? Because you've got an awfully special group of players here. That is ultimately what this is about. And the Federation continues to try and take credit, continues to take away from the celebrations. Because how much time have we actually spent talking about what Spain did in the, 3 days since they won the World Cup? All the headlines have been about Luis Rubiales. That's not how this is supposed to work. Obviously, what he did was not okay. His behavior is unacceptable. We'll see what happens from here. Because the point I want to end on was Spain before I get to some other teams. Of course, it's a completely different set of circumstances and different context. But there are some real similarities to the stuff I was talking about with the racism issues in La Liga on the men's side and everything Vinicius went through last season. It's about people in leadership, people at the top, not holding themselves accountable or not being held accountable by others. Right? What was the immediate reaction? It was to dismiss what Vinicius was saying, to dismiss the severity, the prevalence, the seriousness of him being racially abused. What was the initial reaction here? To take the credit away from the players, to dismiss Rubiales' behavior, to try and downplay it. Of course, again, different people, different situations. But that thread runs through both of these. And that was something I was thinking about as well. Change isn't going to happen until there's some accountability for people at the top. Because what you're seeing is a lot of people who are just excusing and accepting behavior. And in some way condoning it. That are the ones ultimately making the decisions. Players can only do so much. General public can only do so much. Politicians can only do so much. Media can only do so much. What everybody can do is demand accountability and see if you actually get some. Which is what's happening here, it seems like, which is great. And eventually, it's kind of the same thing that happened with Vinicius, right? Where enough people just made enough noise that finally people in leadership started feeling like they had to say something to at least appease the general public. Now, how much oomph there really was behind those words, we're still kind of waiting to find out on that. But ultimately, that's a lot of what this is. These issues are stemming, at least in part, from the leadership not only making mistakes, but then not immediately going to acknowledge them and try and fix them. It's doubling down. It's trying to downplay it, trying to excuse it, instead of actually addressing the issues that are getting brought up to them. We'll see how all this plays out. Expecting, this is not over yet with Rubiales, so we'll see kind of what happens from here. Second, I do want to touch on England just for a little bit, coming so close to doing something that actually the last team to do was the Spain's men's national team, ironically, to hold both the European Championship and the World Cup at the same time. Of course, there's that, back-to-back-to-back major tournament triumphs for Spain. I believe it was 2008, 2010, 2012 on the men's side. But it is the Spanish women's team that prevents England from doing the same thing. There's one player on this roster over the age of 31. It is Laura Coombs. who was, not a huge factor in this tournament, not a central part of this team. That's it. You've got Rachel Daly and Lucy Bronze at 31, I believe. But it always gets kind of interesting when you start, and you saw this with the U.S. team that I'm going to talk about next, with somebody like Julie Ertz seeming to announce her retirement from national team competition, from the national team immediately after this tournament. And the interesting part about this for this England group, and obviously Ertz's situation is a little bit different because she kind of came back in for this World Cup, but you take a Lucy Bronze, you take a Rachel Daly. England still have an opportunity to qualify for next summer's Olympics, where some of these same teams are going to be there. You're going to get an opportunity to, potentially play the U.S. again, or whoever it might be. We're not talking about the next World Cup at this point, and obviously there's a Euros in between as well. It's not like this has to be the end for this group. You're going to maybe lose some players if you don't get to the Olympics next summer, before the next Euros comes around. But this is a team that has consistently delivered in major tournaments, going even, back a couple World Cups. Not only are they one of the best teams in the world, but they're also one of the most consistent. Even if it's not exactly what you want all the time, I've been pretty consistent in my belief that the balance that was so important to them winning the Euros wasn't quite there at this World Cup in terms of, this is the story with both England national teams, right? All this attacking talent. How much do you just let them go? How pragmatic are you? Gareth Southgate, too much on the pragmatic end most of the time, I would argue. Serena Wiegman has done a better job finding that balance, but it wasn't quite there at times in this tournament. But my larger point here is just simply that this is not the end. It doesn't have to be. You can bring back this entire, with a healthy Leah Williamson, with a healthy Beth Mead, hopefully. Bring this squad back and give the Olympics a go next year. See if you can qualify. And then go from there. Of course, you have your Ella Toons, your Lauren Jameses, your Alicia Russios, who are still, under the age of 25. But this group that has been through so much can still continue. And that is where I wanted to start this conversation with England. The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is there was a lot of talk about the things going on with other teams in this tournament, with Spain, with Jamaica, South Africa. You can go down the list. Canada. England were dealing with some stuff too, whether it was the federation issues. The Athletic had a whole piece about kind of some of the other smaller things that happened. Of course, you had the injuries. Then Kira Walsh gets hurt. Lauren James gets suspended for 2 games. There were quite a lot of distractions for this team. Now, you can't make that excuse with what Spain was dealing with, and Spain were able to overcome it. But, again, some of the self-inflicted from the Federation. Can you learn from this and set these players up for success better next time around? Whether that's the Olympics, the next Euros, next World Cup. I still really, really, really like this team. I just continue to believe in them and the balance that they have, their multi-dimensionality, their, if that's even a word, their ability to win games multiple ways. It just didn't happen for them in the final, and that happens to teams sometimes. Next, I do want to address some things with the U.S. women's national team quickly here. I wrote about this in my 5 things from the week, but haven't talked about it on video. And now it makes even more sense with some of the stuff that Lindsey Horan has said. My biggest concern in terms of first team, your actual U.S. women's national team, not the whole program, but the top group that's going to compete at the Olympics next summer and is trying to find a new coach and a new general manager. To me, this is about talent maximization more than anything else. It is not a talent issue. And I do, there is that worry. If you look at what Spain have and what Spain have coming up the pipeline with the success of their youth teams, you look at England and the new players that are coming in there. Germany, obviously, really talented. Netherlands, Sweden, Japan were excellent at this tournament. The talent advantage is not what it once was. And there's a real argument that on paper, the U.S. is not the best team in the world anymore. Maybe it kind of depends on, the tournament. And obviously, this was nowhere near a full-strength U.S. team. So maybe if you do throw Katarina Macario and Mallory Swanson in there, everybody does kind of feel like it's still the best team in the world. The talent is going to be fine. And I harped on this point. I'll bring it up one more time. Swanson, Macario, Smith, Girma, Fox. This team is going to be fine for the next, 5 to 10 years. And that's before you even get to the Alyssa Thompsons of the world. What happened at this tournament is that, and at the Olympics, was that Vlatko Andonovski was not able to get the most out of this team the way that other managers were able to get the most out of their teams. And in this, maybe this job more than just about any other in the sport, that's your job. You don't need to make these players better. You don't need to find a way to get something that's greater than the sum of your individual parts. You got to just let these players do their thing. Can you create an environment where that happens? The answer for Andonovski was no, and that's the main reason why he is no longer this team's manager. And then you go hear what Lindsey Horan said. I believe it was to Tobin Heath and Christian Press on their podcast about, couldn't find the joy. Sweden game, we kind of just made it up on our own and changed what we were doing, and it worked a lot better. Those are the red flags that are really concerning. Because once again, even though this was an incredibly disappointing overall tournament and end result, Sweden nearly took down Spain. The U.S. dominated that Sweden team. It is entirely possible we are talking about a three-peat if they win that shootout. Is it a guarantee? No, of course not. But it's not time to panic. But that's what I'm looking for in the next manager. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just got to find a way to make sure you're getting the most out of that your players are playing up to their capability. You don't have to find a way to get this collective strength that some other teams need because they don't have the talent. The talent is there. You just got to make it shine. And the other thing that I wanted to point out here is, and this is one of those things that you have a bad World Cup and you start looking at the youth programs and you see that the success hasn't been great at the youth levels, and you just kind of do a whole, detailed analysis of the entire program top to bottom. That is something that is going to be more important than ever moving forward. I'm not worried about the talent development in terms of being able to still create world-class players and be able to develop world-class players. That's going to happen. But you don't have the same kind of margin for error that you did when, in terms of the structure of the system. You got to get this right. That's what Matt Crocker's job is here. That's why he's in this job. It's what he did at Southampton. It's what he helped do with the English national team setups. Because these other countries now have those kind of players coming through their system too. And those countries have those players coming through a system that is now really starting to develop them from an academy standpoint. And that is where the U.S. is way behind Europe. You're starting to see it where, Alyssa Thompson gets to play in the NWSL every week. And Olivia Moultrie is getting to play with the Portland Thorns and has been in their system for a little while now. And, it's been interesting listening to the Snacks podcast that Sam Mewis and Lynn Williams are doing. Sam Mewis has said on multiple occasions, I just wonder how much better I could have been if I was in a professional setup instead of going to college. Having this conversation about kind of where the NWSL is going and all these young players. That's starting to catch up to Europe. But you don't have the ability to just compensate for mistakes you make in the overall program. Because other countries are figuring this out too, and other countries are putting the same kind of money in. Same kind of detail, same kind of investment. And so now you're not working with this built-in advantage, which means if you don't get that part right, you're falling behind the Spains and Englands of the world. So that is the other part of this I'm interested in. More than ever. Got to get it right from the ground up. That's why Matt Crocker is there. Of course, he's also going to pick the coach. But to me, that is what his job is. And also, that's the general manager. And nobody seems to know exactly what these general managers do. They're just kind of there to support the whole thing. Be nice to see a little bit more definition on that and making sure that you're not just taking for granted your ability to develop players. That you are going through and leaving no stone unturned to make sure that that entire track from start to finish is as good as it can be. And then finally, just overall, of course, one of the big themes of this tournament was the growth of the sport, and look how far all of these countries have come and how far the women's game has come and all of that. And I want to take this in a little bit different direction and just look at this moving forward. First thing is your Jamaicas, your South Africas of the world. Countries that had success in spite of little to no support from their federation. Does the money start to come? Does the investment start to come? Because if Jamaica can do that without any real support from the federation, imagine what they can do with a little bit of money. And not only is it those countries, but also you heard Sam Kerr talking about this with Australia. How does Australia build off of this tournament that captivated the country? And of course, the team on the field delivered, got to the semifinal, was pushing England. Sam Kerr scores that great goal to equalize. Can you take it to the next level? Can you make this a foundational moment within the Matildas program? And then the last part of this is just, what is the overall impact of this tournament on the sport and the way that federations view it? Because what has become abundantly clear, that I've alluded to without specifically saying it at multiple occasions through these other takeaways I've had, is that if you get serious about the women's side of the sport and your women's national team and you put the money in, you're not just going to get better. You can go win major tournaments. Look at England. Look at Spain. Right? We weren't talking about these countries this way 4 years ago. Maybe it's 8 for England. But what happened? Spain and Barcelona in particular got serious about the women's team. Now they're just churning out world-class players. England got serious about the women's team. Now there is look as good as anybody in the world moving forward about what that team's going to be. But it's not like it came from a place where they were competing with the U.S. a decade ago. That's one of the fascinating parts of this to me, is that any country can look at this and go, you know what, if we give this enough attention and care, why can't we be up there with the best teams in the world? It doesn't mean it's guaranteed. But that's the part of this whole growth thing I think gets overlooked a little bit, is the 2 finalists just decided to really start investing, right? Countries with incredible heritages in the sport that just were putting all their focus on the men's side. Now they decide to show some attention to the women's side too, and all of a sudden, what do you know? They're turning out world-class players just like they do on the men's side. And you look at the U.S. getting knocked out in the round of 16, and I know it was Sweden, an established world power, but it's there for the taking. To me, that's one of the stories of this tournament, is that if you want it bad enough, there's nobody that's going to automatically stand in your way. This thing is wide open moving forward. You've got probably 5 countries that are right there at the top, but there's plenty of room for more people to join them. And to get to a point like a men's World Cup where you can talk yourself into 10, 15 teams winning it. Who are going to be those other teams that kind of step up in the next World Cup cycle and set themselves on a pathway to being the next England, the next Spain?